Imagine being trapped in a vast, unending forest where every step could be your last, and the environment itself is as deadly as the enemy. This isn't the plot of a horror movie. It's the harrowing reality of soldiers during the Vietnam War, a conflict that stands as one of the most grueling and contentious in modern history. Welcome to the Green Hell. The Vietnam War, a protracted conflict that lasted from 1955 to 1975, was more than a battle between North and South Vietnam. It was a stage where superpowers clashed, ideologies were tested, and the horrors of modern warfare were unveiled to the world. The stakes were incredibly high, with the United States, fearing the spread of communism, supporting the South Vietnamese government against the Communist North, led by Ho Chi Minh, and backed by allies such as the Soviet Union and China. But the Vietnam War was different from any other war fought before it. It wasn't just about the battles fought on the ground. It was about the struggle for the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese people. It was a war where guerrilla tactics met advanced technology, and where the dense jungles of Southeast Asia became arenas of death, concealing everything from booby traps to sniper nests. Soldiers weren't only fighting the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army, they were battling the relentless terrain and a climate that could kill just as effectively as any bullet. The geography of Vietnam is unique and played a crucial role in the conflict. Stretching over 1,000 miles from north to south, Vietnam is a tapestry of towering mountains, dense forests, and winding rivers. Much of the combat occurred in the south, where the landscape varies dramatically from the flat Mekong Delta to the rugged highlands. This diverse terrain influenced every strategic decision made during the war and contributed to the nickname Green Hell given by those who fought there. The jungles of Vietnam are nothing short of inhospitable. Thick canopies block out the sun, creating a gloomy, disorienting environment where visibility is often reduced to a few feet. The heat is stifling, with humidity that clings to your skin and soaks through your clothes. Wildlife, from venomous snakes to disease-carrying insects, poses as much of a threat as enemy soldiers, and beneath the foliage, the ground itself is littered with pitfalls, from sharp bamboo stakes hidden in camouflaged pits to explosive mines that could be triggered at any step. Amidst this treacherous backdrop, both sides employed tactics that reflected the brutal nature of the terrain. The Viet Cong used their intimate knowledge of the landscape to their advantage, constructing intricate tunnel systems and laying countless traps. These tunnels, some of which stretched for miles, included living quarters, hospitals, and command posts, all hidden beneath the jungle floor. American and Allied forces, meanwhile, tried to counter with technology and firepower, using helicopters, napalm, and heavy bombing campaigns to clear vegetation and enemy positions. However, despite the overwhelming firepower, the US and its allies found it incredibly challenging to adapt to the guerrilla warfare tactics of the Viet Cong. Traditional battle strategies were often useless in the maze-like environment of the Vietnamese jungle. The Viet Cong would strike swiftly and vanish, melting back into the jungle as if they had never been there. One of the most significant and bloodiest battles of the Vietnam War was the Battle of Khe Sanh, beginning in January 1968. This confrontation epitomized the brutal nature of the conflict and the extreme conditions under which soldiers fought. American Marines held the Khe Sanh Combat Base, located in the northwest corner of South Vietnam, close to the borders of Laos and North Vietnam. For 77 excruciating days, they were subjected to constant bombardment and encirclement by North Vietnamese forces. The prelude to this critical confrontation began when American intelligence detected a buildup of North Vietnamese troops around the Kep San area. What followed was a siege that would test the limits of human endurance and military strategy. The North Vietnamese encircled the base, cutting off supply lines, and launched a relentless artillery, mortar, and rocket barrage, making it one of the most heavily bombarded outposts of the war. As supplies dwindled and casualties mounted, the defenders of Khe Sanh prepared for the possibility of a ground assault that could overrun the base. The world watched, waiting for an outcome that would not only decide the fate of the soldiers at Khe Sanh, but could also influence the entire course of the war. What strategic decisions and acts of valor could save Khe Sanh from falling? What lessons would the world learn from the hellish conditions these soldiers endured? Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the siege of Kep Sanh, explore the strategies employed, the heroism displayed, and the sheer willpower it took to survive the Green Hell. As the siege of Khe Sanh intensified, the world witnessed a microcosm of the broader Vietnam War, marked by chaos, catastrophe, and the colossal challenge of surviving in the inhospitable Green Hell. The battle was a grueling test of endurance and strategy, encapsulating the misery and the complex dynamics of this protracted conflict. The North Vietnamese forces, understanding the symbolic and strategic value of Khe Sanh, were determined to take the combat base. Their strategy was to isolate it, cut off reinforcements and supplies, and overwhelm the defenders with continuous bombardments. This approach was not just military, but psychological, aiming to wear down the morale of the American and South Vietnamese troops. The American commanders, anchored by General William Westmoreland, believed that Khe Sanh could be the American Dien Bien Phu, a decisive battle where they could lure significant North Vietnamese forces into an open confrontation and defeat them with superior firepower. Westmoreland committed substantial aerial and artillery resources to defend the base and launched Operation Niagara, a massive aerial bombardment campaign to break the siege. However, the reality on the ground was starkly different from strategic expectations. The aerial bombings, while extensive, often failed to deter the North Vietnamese army's advances, partly due to the dense jungle canopy which provided natural cover. Moreover, the heavy reliance on air power led to some tragic friendly fire incidents, adding to the chaos and bloodshed. The conditions at Khe Sanh were dire. The base was pounded by over 1,200 shells a day at the height of the siege, creating a relentless cacophony of explosions and fear. The monsoon season turned the base into a muddy quagmire, complicating movement and living conditions. Supplies had to be airdropped under heavy fire, with many of the supplies landing outside the base perimeter, either destroyed or unreachable due to enemy fire. Amid these conditions, the troops on the ground displayed extraordinary resilience and ingenuity. The defenders constructed extensive underground facilities mirroring the tactics of their enemy. These bunkers and tunnels provided some respite from the artillery, but were far from safe havens, as they were vulnerable to direct hits from larger shells. The psychological toll on the soldiers was immense. Constant bombardment, uncertainty about supply lines, and the ever-present threat of a ground assault pushed many to the brink. Yet, amidst this chaos, there were acts of incredible bravery and camaraderie as soldiers fought not just for strategic objectives, but for the survival of their fellow comrades. The North Vietnamese, meanwhile, faced their own set of challenges. Their supply lines were stretched, and while they were well versed in jungle warfare, the intensity of the American bombings took a significant toll. The North Vietnamese also made strategic errors, underestimating the extent of American air power and the resilience of the defenders. Their belief that they could force a quick surrender at Khe Sanh was misguided, resulting in prolonged engagement that drained resources and lives on both sides. One of the most controversial aspects of the battle was the American command's decision to continue holding Khe Sanh despite the high costs and questionable strategic value. Critics argued that the fixation on Khe Sanh diverted resources from other critical areas, particularly during the Tet Offensive, where cities and towns across South Vietnam were attacked by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces in a coordinated surprise assault. The Tet Offensive, which began on January 30, 1968, marked a turning point in the Vietnam War. While Khe Sanh was under siege, the Tet Offensive shocked the American public and leadership, who had been led to believe that the North Vietnamese were being defeated and the war would soon end. The images and reports from Tet and Khe Sanh painted a picture of a war far from being won, leading to a significant shift in American public opinion. In the end, the siege at Khe Sanh lasted for 77 days, with American forces eventually breaking the siege in early April. The North Vietnamese withdrew, having suffered heavy casualties. The Americans had held the base, but at a great cost and with strategic outcomes that remain debated by historians. Some argue that Khe Sanh distracted North Vietnamese resources from the Tet Offensive, while others believe it was a costly sideshow. The aftermath of Khe Sanh and the Tet Offensive led to a re-evaluation of American strategy in Vietnam. The war of attrition strategy, relying heavily on firepower and body counts, was increasingly seen as flawed. The conflict demonstrated the limits of conventional military power in guerrilla warfare and highlighted the need for a more nuanced approach to winning hearts and minds. As we reflect on the chaos and catastrophe of Khe Sanh, it's clear that this battle was emblematic of the Vietnam War's broader challenges. It was a conflict defined by its brutal environment, the resilience of its combatants, and the profound miscalculations by its leaders. The lessons of Khe Sanh, steeped in blood and mud, remain a stark reminder of the complexities and costs of war, particularly one fought in the unforgiving terrain of the Green Hell. As the siege of Khe Sanh reached its climax, the battle-hardened defenders and their North Vietnamese adversaries found themselves locked in a struggle that seemed as unending as the war itself. The North Vietnamese forces eventually lifted the siege in March 1968, pulling back after realizing that the fortress would not fall easily and that the cost in lives and resources might outweigh any strategic gains. The Americans, meanwhile, claimed victory, having held the base despite the overwhelming odds. The end of the siege did not bring peace to Vietnam, nor did it herald a turning point towards victory for U.S. forces. Instead, it marked a continuation of the bloody stalemate that characterized much of the war. The months that followed saw continued fighting, with neither side able to secure a decisive victory. The war dragged on for several more years, its end finally coming not from military victory but from weariness and disillusionment on all sides. The human cost of the Vietnam War was staggering. Estimates suggest that over 58,000 American soldiers lost their lives, while Vietnamese casualties, both military and civilian, numbered in the millions. The war left deep scars on the American psyche, leading to a generation of veterans who returned home to a country deeply divided over the conflict. In Vietnam, the legacy of the war was even more profound, with countless families devastated, landscapes scarred by bombs and defoliants, and a nation left to rebuild from the ruins of war. History has a way of sidelining uncomfortable truths, and the Vietnam War is no exception. For many years it was a war that many preferred to forget, a chapter of American history marked by failure and moral ambiguity. The veterans of the war, both American and Vietnamese, often found themselves marginalized, their sacrifices overshadowed by the larger political and cultural battles of the time. Yet, the Vietnam War, and particularly battles like Cat San, offer crucial lessons about the limits of military power, the complexities of guerrilla warfare, and the profound human costs of conflict. The war challenged the narratives of technological superiority and righteous ideology, revealing a much messier reality where victory was elusive, and survival often came at a devastating cost. Today, the jungles of Vietnam have largely reclaimed the ground once scarred by bombs and bloodshed. The wildlife that once posed such a threat to soldiers has returned, and the forests are once again a place of natural beauty rather than a backdrop for human tragedy. But for those who fought, the memories of the Green Hell remain vivid, a reminder of a war that was as much about survival against the elements as it was about the enemy. In reflecting on the Vietnam War and the siege of Khe Sanh, it is crucial to remember not just the strategic and political implications, but the human stories. The young men who fought and died in the jungles did so not just for their countries but for their comrades, fighting alongside them in conditions that tested the limits of human endurance. The Vietnam War remains a poignant chapter in the history of warfare, a conflict that reshaped perceptions of military power and highlighted the importance of understanding both the environment and the people in any conflict. It is a war that should not be forgotten, not just for the sake of those who lived it, but for the lessons it offers in the complexity and cost of war. As the sun sets over the once contested hills of Khe Sanh, it leaves behind shadows that stretch long into history, reminding us that wars are not just about the battles fought and won, but about the lives changed and lost, and the enduring struggle to find meaning amidst the chaos.